Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's C-O-M-B-E-S-T, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?
I'm Egbert, the owner of this station. Check out my website at egbert.com. That's E-G-G-B-U-R-T, egbert.com. Now it's back to Brad and John. Check out their website at bjshow.co. The BJ Show? Come on, guys. Anyway, here's B and J.
It is BJ Show, and you can check out our shows. We archive them, and probably the easiest way to find them, and John does an excellent job on our YouTube channel. Go to bjshow.video, bjshow.video. After I put them up, and by the way, John, an audible here, I forgot to tell you this off air, so I'll do it on air so I don't forget. I got to duck out of here right at 8 o'clock this morning because I have a appointment I have to make with my youngest son. I have a doctor's appointment I have to take him to. Okay, the Boeing thing, okay? First off, Josh Hawley, I'm not a big fan of Josh Hawley because, and I guess I should maybe let this go because, once again, when he ran for Attorney General, one of his campaign promises was, remember this, John? Remember what did he say?
That he was not a ladder climber.
Yes, he was not going to use his job as Attorney General, AG, as a stepping stone to a higher position. And I think he was in office probably about 20 seconds and was already planning his move to run for the Senate, which he did. And I know we talk about this from time to time, but Shelley and I went to one of his campaign stops back in the day out in St. Charles and to try to get him to advertise in the station. And we actually talked with him briefly. We talked to his campaign manager, and we says, hey, we're a locally owned and operated radio station. Oh, we'll buy a lot of ads on your station. And the irony of the situation is they bought 0 on my station, and Claire McCaskill made a couple house payments for me. So, all I can say is It was sort of weird. Okay, so having said that, if you watch him when he does these hearings, he is so good. Good. And not only that, I'll give the people that never get credit for this with a lot of these congressional hearings, and especially with him and also with Senator John Kennedy, who is, the good old Southern boy from Louisiana, they do their homework. They have a staff. And, John, you know this better than anybody because you were one of those staffers once upon a time, right?
Yeah, that's true.
And they dig up things. And what I find fascinating is, especially when John Kennedy, when they have these judges that come up in front of them and for their confirmation hearings and things like that, Kennedy pulls stuff. And what's interesting is a lot of times when he reads this stuff, they first deny saying that they said it. And then he'll say,
yeah, you're right.
Well, then he'll say, well, here it is right here. Didn't you pen this article in the Houstonian, Gazette on April 1st, 2022? And wasn't this your op-ed column? And then finally, well, I didn't actually write that. My staff wrote it,
Yes, that was and who was, I don't mean to get you off track, but there was an instance when Kennedy did that and the woman was like, yeah, well, I didn't actually write that. And Kennedy said, yeah, but your name is on this, right?
Yes,
they're attesting that everything in here is true.
Exactly. I mean, the thing about it is that was an official court document. Something I remember exactly what you're talking about because she says, well, I didn't write that opinion. My staff wrote that opinion. And he says, well, you signed it, didn't you?
Yeah, and I got you off track. You were talking about Hawley.
Well, but see, the interesting thing about it is there's two sides to this equation. First off, there's the news media side of this equation with the thing with Boeing that now, and it's gotten to the point where if a plane has a blowout on takeoff, from the Lagos, Nigeria airport, and it's a 40-year-old Boeing 707, they go, oh my God, quality issues with Boeing. Okay, there comes a point when if you, for example, my one car is coming up in 300,000 miles, okay? After 300,000 miles, I pretty much figured out whatever the manufacturing defects were And it's no factor anymore because now at this point in time, it comes down to me maintaining the car properly. Otherwise, it's not to the point where if I've got close to 300,000 miles, I would say that good old Ford made a pretty good car that hasn't blown up yet. Okay, but now what's happened is anytime there's any kind of a little kind of story, Boeing was missing an ashtray on their newest 737 Max.
I get it.
And it's to the point where it's like, okay, give it a rest. And if you know anything about aircraft, there is this thing called, there's all sorts of different things that come out, and I don't fly anymore. I don't remember all the things, but there's various things called airworthiness directives, okay? And there are various levels of this, and essentially as planes mature and as people get a new aircraft comes out and it starts to fly, there are little idiosyncrasies that are picked up by the pilots, by the crew, and more specifically by the mechanics. And some of these come back to there could be a problem with manufacturing of part. It actually could be a design deficiency, because that's why you have the whole situation is like if you go back in the history of like even the 737, I don't know how many different models there are of the 737. Yes, it's a 737, but there's the 100, the 200, the 300, and then there's all sorts of other derivations of that, primarily because as these aircraft get out there in the real world, they find that, hey, we could tweak this and make this operate a little bit better. We could do this and get a little bit more fuel efficiency out of it. And that is the whole concept of what happened with the 737 MAX, where essentially they re-engined it to essentially make it more efficient and make it quieter. And by doing that, by putting different size engines on it, that's the whole 737 MAX issue in a nutshell. The plane was not designed, the airframe originally was not designed for the engines that's on it right now. And primary reason, the primary reason for this?
Why is that?
They did not want to have the aircraft be that high off the ground. They wanted an aircraft that and go back. This goes back to some of the history of. I mean, even in my lifetime, I can remember flying into the Sarasota airport years and years and years ago, where there's no jetway. There's a guy who pushes stairs up against the plane, And if you go back and look at old pictures of Lambert before they had the jetways and things like that, the planes came into the terminal, and a guy came out with what they call the air stairs, and the air stairs went up to the side of the plane, and you walk down the stairs across the tarmac into a door into the terminal. And the reason that the 737 was designed, it was designed to be low to the ground, because the job of the 737 primarily was a hub and spoke aircraft. It wasn't a cross-country aircraft. It wasn't designed to fly from New York to L.A., nor was it designed to fly essentially, transatlantic, because back in the day, and this is aircraft nerd history stuff, back in the day, the FAA regulations were you could not cross the engine, or you could not cross an ocean with less than 3 engines. You had to have a minimum of 3 engines, and that is why when Boeing redesigned the 707 into the 727, they made it a tri-engine. Same thing with which originally was the MD-10, McDonnell Douglas 10, which eventually became the MD-11. It was a tri-engine plane, and then the FAA changed the rules and regulations where you could fly across the ocean with 2 engines, which is what you have now with the 757, 767, 777, 787, the A320s and things like that. So
I see.
So as things, once again, as the industry changes, there are subtle little things that are done. And are there problems with Boeing? Yeah. Are there problems with, if you go down to a car dealership, if you took like some super duper mechanic and you took him to any car dealership, and he said, this is Joe Mechanic. He's the world's best car inspector in the world. We're going to randomly pick a brand new car off your lot, and he's going to go through and he's going to inspect it. I bet you'd come up with 30 things that are wrong.
Yeah.
From the factory. Are you there still?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I track exactly with what you're saying.
Okay. Can I tell a quick Brad stupid story?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay. This is one of my stupid stories, okay? Back in 1994, I sold my business. And for the first time in my life, I had a little money in my pocket. In my younger years, I was always fascinated by people who had Mercedes-Benz diesel. Matter of fact, my old friend, I don't know if he'd consider me to be a friend anymore, but John Craddock, a.k.a. Editorial, a.k.a. Frank Opinion, had a Volkswagen, had a Mercedes-Benz 300D. The Mercedes-Benz 300D was probably one of the finest cars Mercedes ever made. I mean, literally, it was a diesel. It was bulletproof. It was a four-door car. They're still out there on the road today. Matter of fact, they are very, very, very sought after today because of the fact that you can run them on all sorts of things. You can literally run them on grease from the fast food fryer at Wendy's. Okay, so. This was, keep in mind, this is 1994. I would say probably somewhere in the 80s, the EPA came along and said, we're not going to allow diesel cars in the United States anymore. So there were no diesels. And at the time, there were quite a few diesel cars. You could buy Mercedes. You could buy, matter of fact, Volkswagen had a Volkswagen Rabbit. One of the ladies I worked with at the old KSLQ had a diesel Volkswagen Rabbit that got like 70 miles to the gallon. I mean, it was
nice.
It was crazy, the mileage she got off this car. So 1994, I sell my company. And 1994, Mercedes comes out with a diesel. And I'm going
I see where this is going.
I want a diesel Mercedes. And I had a little money in my pocket. So thinking to myself, I'm going to buy myself a diesel Mercedes. So I go over to Plaza, right there, Olive and 270. I swear to God, this is a true story. So I go over to Plaza, and I walk in, and I say to the guy, and I think it was the time, I think the model number was 320D. I go, do you have any of those new diesel Mercedes? Oh, yeah, we've got two of them. Just came in. I said, I really want one of those. And it was the wrong thing to say to a car sales guy. And the guy says, well, before we do anything, you'll have to take it for a drive. And I said, okay, let's go. So we go back to, they have their own little parking garage there. And if you know, in the back, there's a, parking garage, just like you'd see, downtown. And we walk up on the third level. I think it was the third level. And here's this Mercedes-Benz 320D. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, I am in love. And he gets in the passenger seat. Before he does, throws me the keys across the hood. He says, it's all yours. So I get in and fire that sucker up, and I hear that diesel come to life. I think to myself, oh, my God, I'm in love with this car. I'm buying this car. So off we go down Ballas. I go south in Ballas. And he says, let's get on the interstate. And he says, and open her up and see all the power this diesel's got. So I go west on Ladue, and I go north on the ramp. And I'm going up the ramp on 270 northbound. Brand new Mercedes. I think I remembered looking at the odometer. I think it had 12 miles on it, okay? And I'm accelerating up the ramp. And he goes, no, put your foot into it. So I accelerate. No, he says, put it to the floor. So I put the accelerator to the floor. Boom, 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 boom. I'm going, what the hell is that? And I look over to him. The car starts shaking and shuddering. And it starts rapidly decreasing in speed. By the time we made it, and we got off back at Olive, so we're making like a big loop. So by the time we got up to the end of the ramp at Olive, the thing's barely moving. We're maybe doing 15.
Well, what happened, Brad?
I blew the engine in it.
Oh, wow.
But the story gets better. I pull into the parking garage, back in, and this thing sounds like it's a bucket of bolts.
Oh.
It's just like barely surviving. So he says to me, I swear, he looks at me and he goes, hey, he says, new cars, our mechanics will take a look. It probably needs a little adjustment. So he starts showing me around the car, and he says, let me show you how big the trunk is, okay? I swear to God, this is a true story. He opens up the trunk, and there must have been 24 empty beer cans in the trunk. Like somebody...
Oh, nice. Yes. So do you think he and the team took it out?
I have no idea. So he opens up the trunk, sees all these beer cans, and I swear to God, he looks at me and he goes, I don't think I'm going to sell you this car today, am I? And I go, no, you're not. And I left, and I was cured. And I thought to myself, I don't want that Mercedes diesel. Okay, something that
so
came.
You ended up not buying any version of it because you saw how it performed
Done.
and that it was subpar.
Well, it cured me of the car. I mean, it cured me of a Mercedes. Yeah. See, what's interesting is I have to tell you, there is a part in my career where I had a couple people that I had one guy that I won't mention his name because he's still around and I won't embarrass him. And he told me, and this is sort of interesting. I think I've even told you this crazy story about the fact that when I went in for a guy by the name of a guy who was the general manager at the time for the Clear Channel stations here in St. Louis when they were still called Clear Channel. And ironically, his name was Lee Clear, Clear. I was bidding on a deal that they had up for, and I got the deal because the guy who was competing against me wore short sleeve shirts. And Lee told me that. He says, I think the other guy has a better product. He says, but he shows up here when he meets with me in short sleeve shirts, and he says, that's just not right. So I'm going with you because you have on a long sleeve shirt. And I'm going like,
that's good. I mean, he's standing on principle. I like that. The kids these days call it standing on business. I like that, Brad.
To this day, you will rarely ever see me anything other than a long sleeve shirt that stuck with me. I mean, crazy.
Well, we know that there's no such thing as a short sleeve dress shirt. I mean, some men think that there is, but there's no such thing.
Well, I agree with that. And the other aspect of it, another person who I will not remain nameless, told me that any man who wants to succeed in business has to have, and this is interesting because if you look at this with all the politicians, you have to have 100% cotton white dress shirt. That is your basic go-to, and it has to have come from a dry cleaner, and it has to have a crease, essentially a crease from being steamed on the steam table, whatever they do to it, and starched to the point where if you waved your hand around and somebody got that crease, it would cause a 3-inch gash in their arm. You know what I mean? It would cut their skin.
Yeah. I completely understand that.
And then
now that's probably gone by the wayside a bit. I think, unfortunately, since COVID. I think with the ridiculous relaxing of dress standards, I think that's probably gone by the wayside, don't you think?
And another mentor of mine said that in order to really get anywhere in business, that's one thing you have to have. One thing you have to have, and you can wear it no matter if you're in your dress clothes or if you're in your shorts and T-shirt. The one thing you have to have is, guess what?
Pair of cowboy boots.
A Rolex.
Oh, yeah. What about a Polex? What about one that you buy on Canal Street in New York? Maybe one you could buy up at Bell Park Plaza at the next swap meet, Brad.
Ronnie, one time I was in there getting my hair cut, and Ronnie says, "Hey, Brad, I know you're only 6 years old, but let me tell you a little story. If you want to get in business, you want to be successful, you got to have a Rolex." And he opened up this drawer.
Yeah, that's right. And, he just happened to have one that fell off a truck, and he could get you a real good deal on it.
And he did. Okay, we have to take a break.
Thanks for checking out the Brad and John Show podcast. This segment of the show is brought to you by John Combest's book, Stalking, Harassment, Internet Trolling, A Guide to Recovering and Rebuilding After Online Attacks. It's a great reference if you've ever been the unfortunate target of a social media attack. It's available on Amazon. Just search John Combest. That's Combest, John Combest, and the book will show up in your search results. Now it's time for another segment of the Brad and John Show. Can you handle it?